What if the greatest scandal inside Buckingham Palace never made it to the headlines? What if a woman, young, invisible, and silenced, held the key to the darkest corner of royal history and only now dares to speak? Because according to her, Prince Andrew wasn't just the Queen's favorite son. He was something else behind closed doors. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. She was barely 19. New to the palace, just a maid. But to him, she was more than staff. She was access, control, a secret nobody could know. He came to her room, again and again, not out of affection, but dominance. Not out of love, but power. And for years, she said nothing. Because who do you tell when your predator wears a crown? Let that sit for a second. A member of the royal family, allegedly using his status to violate not just trust, but the very people paid to serve him. Now, decades later, she's breaking her silence. And what she claims could tear the last threads of the monarchy apart. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. So here's the question no one dares ask out loud. What happens when a royal heir treats the palace like his personal playground, and the staff like disposable toys? She remembers the smell of polished mahogany and lemon wax, the echo of her own footsteps down the long, gold-trimmed corridor. Everything was pristine, controlled, reverent, except for him. From the start, Prince Andrew didn't follow the rules. Not with protocol, not with people, especially not with women beneath his station. And behind those castle walls, there were no cameras watching him, only eyes that quickly looked away. He didn't bark orders. He smiled, too warmly. He complimented her, not like a royal, more like a man sizing up his next indulgence. And when she laughed nervously the first time he cornered her in the laundry wing, he leaned in close and said something she never forgot. Relax. No one's watching here. You belong to me while you're under this roof. She froze. Did he mean it? And more importantly, did anyone else hear it? Or was she already completely alone? That night, she didn't sleep. The royal walls felt smaller, her uniform tighter, the air around her heavy, because deep down, she knew it wasn't a joke. It was a warning, and it wouldn't be the last. But what came next would leave her questioning everything she thought she could endure. He wasn't supposed to be in the servants' quarters. That was the first rule you're told when you work in the palace. Staff stays in their own world. Royals stay in theirs. Lines aren't just drawn. They're reinforced with centuries of tradition. So why was Prince Andrew standing barefoot in the hallway outside her room? Why did he smile like they were equals? She was only 19, from a small town, raised to believe that royalty meant honor, discipline, grace. That stepping foot inside Buckingham Palace was like being welcomed into history itself. But the truth was colder. The palace wasn't a fairy tale. It was a fortress, and inside it, rank ruled everything. She remembers the day she arrived, how her hands shook as she signed the staff ledger, how the head housekeeper reminded her, you speak when spoken to. You don't look them in the eye unless instructed, and you never, ever, mention what you see. It was meant to be exciting, a job few ever got. But the excitement faded the moment Andrew showed up the first time. It was nearly midnight. She'd just finished her shift. Hair tied up, shoes off, pajamas on. Then a knock. Not a soft one. Firm. Intentional. And when she opened the door, there he was. No royal guards. No protocol. Just Andrew. Smiling. Couldn't sleep, he said. Thought I'd come say hello. What would you have done? Because what she did would haunt her for the rest of her life. She stepped back instinctively. Not out of courtesy, but survival. Everything in her body screamed, this isn't normal. This isn't safe. But what do you say to a prince standing in your doorway? Do you close the door on the queen's son? Do you risk insulting someone who, by all accounts, could have you removed from the palace with a single whisper? So she let him in. Not because she wanted to, because she didn't know if she had a choice. He didn't touch her that first night. He didn't have to. He looked around her modest quarters with a smirk, like he was touring an exhibit. His eyes scanned her books, the framed photo of her little sister, the folded uniforms stacked neatly on the chair. And then he sat down, on her bed, legs crossed casually, arms spread, like he owned the place. She stood awkwardly by the door, unsure if she should speak, move, breathe. And then came the first question. You like it here? She nodded. Ever had dinner with a royal before? He asked, eyes locking onto hers. Because I can change that. It was meant to sound charming, light, but underneath the words was something darker, a tone she couldn't quite place until much later. He stayed for 10 minutes, maybe 15, didn't touch her, didn't raise his voice. But when he left, she felt violated. Why? Because of the look in his eyes as he closed the door. Like he knew he'd be back. And next time, she wouldn't be able to say no. Have you ever heard a sentence so simple, yet so sinister, that it rewires the way you see a person forever? Because for her, it was just 9 words. 9 words that turned Buckingham Palace from a workplace into a trap. You belong to me while you're here. He said it lightly, casually, the way someone would comment on the weather. But the meaning? It struck her like a slap. Not because of the words themselves, but because of who said them. A prince. A man raised from birth to believe that people like her weren't co-workers. They were service, tools, convenience. And what scared her most? He said it with confidence, like he expected her to already understand her role. The second night, the moment she realized it wasn't a one-time incident. She didn't sleep after the first visit. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her tiny room, listening to the distant hum of palace generators and the occasional chime of the hallway clock. Every sound made her flinch. Every footstep from the corridor made her heart spike. Would he come back? Should she report him? Would anyone even believe her? Or worse, what if they did believe her? She remembered the head housekeeper's warning during training. Your presence here is a privilege. Jobs like this don't come twice. Discretion keeps this place running. Discretion. That word suddenly felt like a threat. The next day, she tried to shake it off. She ironed uniforms, folded linens, scrubbed floors, polished silver. She moved like a ghost through the palace, trying to convince herself she'd imagined his intentions. Maybe he really was just being friendly. Maybe she misread it. Maybe she was projecting her fear onto something harmless. But then came the second night. Another knock. Same time. Same tone. Not loud. Not frantic. Just confident. Like he knew she'd open. When she hesitated, the knocking stopped. Only for his voice to come through the door. It's me. Just that. No title. No explanation. As if me was all the authority he needed. She opened the door. Slowly. He smiled again. That same unsettling smile. Thought you could ignore me? He asked gently. She swallowed. I was asleep. No, he replied, stepping inside before she could respond. You were waiting. Waiting. That single word froze her. How could he say it with such certainty? How could he believe she existed for him? He closed the door behind him, and she realized he wasn't playing. When a compliment stops being flattering and starts being a warning. He didn't ask permission to sit on her bed this time. He simply did, as if her private space wasn't private at all. You're a pretty girl, he said, scanning her face. Not like the usual staff they bring in. She stiffened. Compliment? Insult? Or something else entirely? He continued. You should appreciate this attention. Some people would kill for it. The contradiction struck her. He spoke as if he was offering her an opportunity, but it sounded more like a claim. She tried changing the subject. Do you need something, sir? He laughed. Don't call me that. It makes me sound old. What should I call you? His smile faded. Andrew. Her breath caught. That wasn't allowed. Staff didn't use royal first names. Not unless invited by the family, and even then, not without context. Say it, he urged. Andrew. It felt wrong. Too familiar. Too dangerous. He nodded, satisfied. See? That's better. Makes things easier when we're alone. Easier for who? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You're new. You don't know how things work yet. But you'll learn. I'll make sure of that. Learn what? What lesson was he planning to teach her? Before she could ask, he added the sentence that would echo in her nightmares for years. You belong to me while you're here. She froze. He said it calmly, as if explaining palace policy. What does that mean? She whispered. He tilted his head. It means I'll come when I want. And you'll be here. Simple. Simple. He stood up, walked to her door, placed his hand on the knob, and turned back. Good night. Don't lock this. Then he left. And for the first time since she arrived at the palace, she felt truly unsafe. The denial phase, when fear pretends to be confusion. Have you ever convinced yourself that something terrifying isn't real, just because accepting the truth is too overwhelming? That's what she did. The next morning, she rationalized it. Maybe he didn't mean it like that. Maybe he was joking. Maybe this was how royals behaved with staff. But deep down, beneath all the excuses she knew. She cleaned his room that afternoon. He wasn't there, but his scent lingered, heavy cologne mixed with something sharper. She tried to focus on the tasks, changing sheets, polishing mirrors, arranging his desk. Then she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small note on his dresser. Just one line. See you tonight. Her blood ran cold. He had left it intentionally, not to communicate, but to remind her. To remind her she had no say in any of this. She crumpled the note in her hand, but the words burned into her mind anyway. The subtle grooming, and why she didn't report him. People often ask, why didn't she tell someone? Why didn't she scream? Why not go to the Queen's advisors? But that question only makes sense if you've never lived inside a system designed to make you powerless. Reporting him would mean accusing the Queen's son. Not a colleague, not a stranger, a prince. Who would believe her? What evidence did she have? What if the palace turned on her? She'd heard stories whispered by senior maids. If you cross a royal, you're out by sunrise. They'll call you unstable. They'll send you home in disgrace. And worst of all, no one outside these walls will ever hear your side. And let's be honest, would you risk your livelihood, your reputation, your safety, for a complaint you knew would vanish into a shredder? Power protects itself. And in Buckingham Palace, power had a name. Andrew. The night, everything changed. The third night wasn't like the others. This time, he didn't knock. He walked in. She had forgotten to check the lock. His lock, according to him. He closed the door quietly behind him. He didn't smile. He didn't greet her. He simply said, "Stand up." Her voice trembled. "Why?" "Because I asked you to." She hesitated. And he moved closer. Not rushing. Not angry. Just certain. Certain she would obey. And she did. Out of fear. Out of shock. Out of the instinct that tells you when you're in danger. He circled her like he was inspecting something he already owned. "You're scared," he murmured. "Good. Means you understand." Understand what? That she was in danger? That he believed she was property? He lifted her chin with one finger. "You'll get used to me." She stepped back. "Please don't." His eyes turned cold. In that moment, she realized something horrifying. He wasn't unpredictable. He wasn't confused. He wasn't misguided. He was intentional, calculated, comfortable. This wasn't new to him. She wasn't his first, and she wouldn't be his last. The power dynamic that paralyzed her. Let me ask you something. If a stranger cornered you, you'd scream, right? If a coworker overstepped, you'd fight back, right? But what if the man in front of you controlled your job, controlled where you lived, controlled who you could speak to, controlled whether the palace believed you, controlled whether you left with your reputation intact? What if the system around him was built to protect him, not you? What if you had no witnesses, no support, no escape? Would you fight? Or would fear smother your voice before it even left your throat? She tried to speak, tried to tell him he was making her uncomfortable. But he cut her off. "Shoo, don't overthink this. You're here to make things easier for me." Easier, as if her existence had no purpose beyond his convenience. He walked toward the door again, hand resting on the knob. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said casually. "Where's something nicer?" And then he was gone. Just like that. Like it was routine. Like it was his right. The palace staff, who looked away. The following morning, she arrived late to the staff dining area. Her hands trembled so badly she dropped her teacup. A senior maid scooped it up, glanced at her, and whispered, "Is he bothering you?" It was the first time someone acknowledged what she was experiencing, even indirectly. She wanted to scream yes. She wanted to collapse into that woman's arms. But before she could answer, the maid looked over her shoulder and stepped away. Andrew entered the corridor. Instant silence. Instant obedience. The maid who had tried to help her? She lowered her gaze, walked off quickly, vanished around the corner. That's when the truth hit her. People knew, or at least suspected. But no one stopped him, because stopping him meant losing everything. The first attempt to fight back, and what it cost her. That evening, she locked her door. Direct defiance. She sat on her bed, knees held to her chest, praying he wouldn't come. But he did. He knocked. Once. Paused. Knocked again. Opened the door. She stayed silent. He knocked harder. "Don't play games," he warned. When she still didn't move, he tried the handle. Locked. And for the first time since she arrived, she felt a flicker of control. He couldn't get in. Not tonight. She heard him exhale sharply. Then he said something that chilled her more than anything so far. You can't hide from me forever. His footsteps faded. She thought she'd won. She was wrong. The punishment came the next day. Her schedule doubled. Her breaks cut. Her days off revoked. Her mistakes, fabricated or exaggerated, reported to the house manager. And when she passed Andrew in the hallway, he didn't look angry. He looked amused. I told you. You belong to me while you're here. The realization that broke her spirit. Have you ever felt trapped somewhere so beautiful, it turns the beauty into cruelty? That was Buckingham Palace for her. Tourists saw history. The world saw royalty. She saw hallways that swallowed screams. Every corner reminded her she had no escape. Every royal portrait seemed to mock her. She began avoiding mirrors. She didn't recognize the girl staring back. She lost weight. Stopped writing home. Stopped laughing. And then came the moment. The exact moment. She knew this wasn't going to stop. She was dusting the staircase banister when Andrew passed behind her and whispered, "Good girl. Good girl." 2 tiny words. But in them was a full declaration. He saw her as obedient. He saw her as accessible. He saw her as his. And no one else was going to intervene. Not the supervisors. Not the palace staff. Not the system built to keep people like her silent. It was her versus an entire monarchy. And she was losing. The final straw. The night she almost ran away. Weeks passed like this. Visits. Threats. Pressure. Punishments. And then, one night, something happened that pushed her to her breaking point. She heard footsteps outside her room. Soft. Slow. Deliberate. And then his voice. Open up. She didn't move. He jiggled the handle. Locked. He sighed. I'm getting tired of this. She stood frozen, muscles tight, breath shallow. Then he said something that made her knees buckle. If you keep making this difficult, I'll have you transferred somewhere far worse. Transferred. He didn't need to say where. She'd heard rumors of staff being quietly moved to isolated estates, remote cottages, or uncomfortable positions far away from anyone who could help them. The footsteps didn't retreat immediately. He waited, as if expecting her to break. But she didn't. Not that night. He eventually walked away. But that threat stayed in the hallway like a shadow that never disappeared. The chapter's ending. The moment of terrifying clarity. That night, sitting alone in her dark room, she realized something devastating. He wasn't visiting her on impulse. This wasn't random. It was routine, planned, patterned. And if she didn't do something, anything, he would escalate. Because predators always escalate. She whispered to herself, voice shaky. I need help. But who? Who could she trust? Who would believe her? There was only one option. Another staff member who might have seen something. She stood up, wiped her tears, and prepared to reach out. But what came next would change everything. Because when she opened her door to ask for help, someone had already left a note on the floor. Just one sentence. And that sentence would send her spiraling into the darkest chapter of her life. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. She dropped it. Her heart stopped. Because that meant someone else had been watching. Someone else knew the truth. But who? And why weren't they helping her escape? Let me ask you something. If you knew a place was full of cameras, cameras that could protect you, prove what happened, expose the truth, wouldn't you feel safe? What if I told you those cameras were never recording when it mattered? Because according to her, Buckingham Palace wasn't just guarded by tradition and secrecy. It was guarded by something far worse. Intentional blindness. And that blindness, it made her feel invisible and vulnerable. Because every time she needed someone to be watching, every time she needed proof, the cameras went dark. The first time, she went looking for proof. It started with paranoia. Understandable, right? When someone visits your room at night, whispers threats at your door, and stares at you like you're a chess piece, not a person, paranoia isn't irrational. It's self-preservation. So after weeks of unwanted visits, veiled threats, and psychological warfare, she did the one thing she thought might protect her. She asked where the security cameras were. Not out loud, of course. Just casually, carefully, during lunch in the staff canteen. There are cameras in the north wing, right? She asked a junior butler, keeping her voice light. He gave her a strange look. Not in the staff quarters, he said. That's private space. Against regulations. She frowned. Really? Even the hallway outside our rooms. He leaned closer. Off the record? They're there. You just won't see them. But whether they're actually recording, that's a whole different story. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. He wasn't joking, and he wasn't smiling. When the blind spots were always convenient. A few days later, something happened that made her test it. Prince Andrew had shown up again, this time more brazen, more entitled, like her silence had emboldened him. He tried the door. Locked. He jiggled it. Knocked once. Then again. Louder. She stayed quiet, holding her breath. Frozen. He said nothing, but she heard his footsteps move, slowly, back down the hall. She rushed to the corridor window, peeking out. Empty. But she knew he'd been there. That was the night she decided to report a security incident. Not him, just the noise. A possible disturbance. She wanted to see how the palace would respond. Whether anything would be reviewed. Whether the footage might show someone lurking near her door. So she left an anonymous report with security. 2 days later, she got a response from the head of housekeeping. False alarm. No footage available. Cameras weren't operating in that section during those hours. Her stomach dropped. Again? No footage wasn't the scary part. The scary part was how casually they said it. Other staff knew, they just wouldn't say it. She started asking around. Softly. Indirectly. Always under the radar. Do you ever feel like the cameras don't work when they should? Has security ever reviewed footage from the service halls? Do they actually monitor staff corridors? The answers came in hushed tones. Oh, sweetheart. Those cameras aren't for us. They're for them. Don't rely on surveillance in this place. Some of the monitors and security haven't worked in years. Budget issues, they say. But it didn't add up. Buckingham Palace runs like a billion-pound machine. Nothing is accidentally broken. So why were the staff corridors unmonitored? And why did it feel like someone wanted it that way? One older maid, eyes sunken with exhaustion, said something that stuck with her. If the cameras were ever on, half the palace would be out of a job. The one time she saw the monitors herself. Her chance came during a storm. A blackout knocked out lights in part of the palace. Emergency teams were dispatched. Staff scrambled with candles, flashlights, backup generators. In the chaos, she was asked to bring towels to the lower security wing. She delivered them and caught a glimpse of the monitors behind the desk. Rows of screens, one after another. Frozen, black, static, except one. Just one screen glowed faintly. It showed a hallway. Polished, quiet. Not her hallway, not her floor. She gestured to it. Is that north wing? The guard didn't look up. That's the east gallery. VIP area. She nodded. And ours. He sighed. Off tonight. They're always off. She stared at him. He didn't even flinch. It was like saying the sun rises in the east. Like this was normal. Her breath caught in her throat. Because she realized something she hadn't dared admit until then. She wasn't just vulnerable. She was being left vulnerable on purpose. The parallel between power and darkness. Think about this. The royal family has everything. Private jets, fortified estates, security advisors, crisis PR, armed bodyguards. And yet, a young maid couldn't get a hallway camera to work, not even when she feared for her life. That wasn't an accident. It was policy. Because power doesn't like to be watched. Power prefers the shadows. And the moment someone turns the lights on, the whole illusion falls apart. She realized Andrew's behavior wasn't risky. It was calculated. He knew the cameras weren't running. Because he'd made sure of it. Or at least, someone had. Someone who understood the palace isn't just a building. It's a machine. And every machine has switches. Off switches. Especially for the people at the bottom. The evidence that went missing. Months later, she met another staffer, a part-time maintenance tech who'd been helping with hallway wiring. Over tea, he let something slip. They asked us to disconnect the North Wing's feed last year. Said it was interfering with something upstairs. But I'm pretty sure that was BS. Her ears perked up. Why? She asked. He shrugged. Because when I reconnected it a month later, someone undid it the next day. No explanation. Just a quiet order from up top. She leaned in. Do you remember who gave the order? He hesitated. No names. But let's just say, the kind of people who don't make requests. They give instructions. She felt sick. Even maintenance was being used to hide what was happening. She asked him one last question. Did you ever see the footage? He shook his head. There wasn't any. Then he paused. But I heard something once. She blinked. Heard what? He looked down. Someone in security said if a real investigation ever happened, they'd be forced to admit that half the palace has blind spots by design. She couldn't breathe. Because that wasn't a technical failure. It was a cover-up. The whistleblower, who disappeared. One woman, an assistant to the head of royal logistics, had whispered to her during a hallway encounter. "Don't trust the electronics," she said. "What do you mean? They know where the dead zones are. It's not new." She wanted to ask more. Push. Plead. But before she could, the woman was gone. Transferred within the week. No farewell. No explanation. Just a line on the staffing board that read, "Relocated to Balmoral, indefinite." That was the code. Indefinite meant don't ask. Indefinite meant she got too close to the truth. And for the maid, it meant one thing. She was alone again. The moment she snapped and left a mark. It happened one night when she caught Andrew outside her door again. Same time, same silence, same expectation. But this time, something broke inside her. She opened the door, looked him dead in the eye, and whispered, "There are cameras now." He froze, then laughed. "Not for you, there aren't." He stepped closer, but she didn't flinch. "I told security I'd been followed. They're reviewing footage." He narrowed his eyes. "You didn't." "I did." That was a lie, but it was the only weapon she had. And for the first time, he stepped back. He didn't come in. He didn't touch her. He just stared. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be," he said coldly. And then, he left. That was the last time he tried to enter her room. She didn't know whether to feel safe or terrified, because something had shifted. He hadn't disappeared. He had simply changed tactics, and she had just painted a target on her back. The chapter's ending. A message she was never meant to see. The next morning, she found something chilling tucked under a silver tray in the staff kitchen. A memo. Short. Unmarked. Folded. She unfolded it, thinking it was misplaced. But it was addressed. Surveillance Protocol, North Wing. Her breath caught. She read it twice. The note was simple, just a brief instruction to deactivate monitoring from sections B through D between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Dated weeks ago. Stamped with a crest she didn't recognize. No signature. No names. Just the instruction. Per directive, do not retain footage. Override standard backup protocols. She nearly dropped it. It confirmed everything. Everything she feared. Everything she suspected. They weren't just ignoring her. They weren't just turning a blind eye. They were erasing the record. Every night. Every incident. Every threat. Gone. She stuffed the note in her pocket and left the kitchen, hands shaking. She had the proof. Not enough to go public, but enough to know she wasn't crazy. Enough to know someone, somewhere inside the palace, was actively helping cover for him. And just as she reached her room, the hallway lights flickered. A small power surge. Then silence. And when she turned the corner, Prince Andrew stood there, just watching her. Expression unreadable. Then he said 4 words. "You made a mistake." What came next would unravel not just her world, but the entire palace. What happens when a predator gets denied? What happens when someone who's always been told yes suddenly hears no? They don't retreat. They punish. Because for people like Prince Andrew, people used to power, impunity, and obedience, rejection isn't just inconvenient. It's a threat to their ego, an insult to their dominance, a crack in the illusion they've carefully constructed. And when she locked her door, when she looked him in the eye, when she whispered the lie about the cameras, she didn't just defend herself. She defied him. And in response, he made her pay. The silent war begins. It didn't happen immediately. The next day was quiet. Too quiet. He didn't show up at her door. He didn't follow her in the halls. He didn't even glance at her during staff briefings. But the stillness wasn't relief. It was a warning. Something was shifting. And by the second day, it began. Her workload tripled. Tasks were reassigned. Rooms she wasn't responsible for suddenly appeared on her schedule. Lavish suites. Enormous ballrooms. Sections of the palace normally split between 3 or 4 staff, all now dumped onto her. And when she tried to ask why, just following new instructions, the supervisor said with a shrug, "No name. No reason. Just new orders." Her body ached. Her hands blistered. She worked late into the night, scrubbing tiles until her knees bled, polishing chandeliers alone, too scared to ask for help. She was being broken down, bit by bit, quietly, efficiently. Isolation as a weapon. Worse than the extra labor? The silence. Her colleagues, those who once shared snacks during breaks, whispered jokes in the linen closets, comforted each other during royal tantrums, they began avoiding her. Eye contact vanished. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Even the cook who used to sneak her an extra scone every morning began treating her like a ghost. And she understood why. No one wanted to be seen as her ally. No one wanted to become his next target. Because everyone knew. They didn't need an explanation. They saw the signs. And they chose survival. She couldn't blame them. But that didn't make it hurt less. When her days off disappeared, every staff member is entitled to rest days, 2 per week, unless there's an emergency. But somehow, her schedule shifted. 1 week, both days revoked. The next week, 1 day deferred. The third week, no days off at all. She approached HR. They claimed her file showed she'd volunteered for overtime. She hadn't. She insisted it was a mistake. But the HR assistant leaned in and said quietly, "If I were you, I'd stop making noise. These requests aren't coming from us." And just like that, she realized. The punishment wasn't random. It was calculated, targeted, personal. The straw that broke her body. By week 4, her body was giving out. Back spasms, chronic fatigue, blurred vision from stress-induced migraines. She fainted once while cleaning one of the staterooms. Collapsed against a gilded fireplace in the middle of dusting an ornate mirror. When she woke up, there was no ambulance. No royal doctor. Just a stiff warning from her floor manager. "You need to be more responsible. If you can't handle the work, we can find someone who will." That wasn't concern. That was a threat. The subtext was clear. Push harder, or you'll be replaced. And in the back of her mind, she wondered, was this part of Andrew's plan? To wear her down until she had no fight left? The psychological games. Then came the mind games. It started with missing items. Her staff ID vanished from her uniform pocket one day. Without it, she couldn't access half the palace. She reported it. It reappeared in her drawer the next morning. Then her toiletries disappeared from the shared staff bathroom. Then her bed was unmade when she returned one afternoon. Even though she always left it perfectly neat. Tiny invasions. Nothing big enough to report. Nothing loud. But enough to make her paranoid. Enough to make her feel watched. And then one morning, the ultimate message arrived. Written in lipstick on her bathroom mirror. "You're not in control." She dropped her toothbrush. Her hands shook. This was no longer about intimidation. This was psychological warfare. The power of untraceable punishments. Have you ever had someone hurt you in ways that left no bruises? That's how he did it. He didn't shout. He didn't hit. He didn't touch her again. But he destroyed her from a distance. Because power doesn't need to be physical to be violent. Power can be logistical, invisible, paper-thin, and razor-sharp. He controlled the staff managers, the rotas, the workloads, the reports. He didn't need to lift a finger, just a word in the right ear. And her life spiraled, a desperate attempt to speak out. She reached her limit. And finally, she broke protocol. She left an unsigned letter in the suggestion box, a desperate plea for intervention. It didn't mention Andrew by name. It only described the intimidation, the workload, the isolation. She begged for help. 2 days later, she was called into a meeting, not with HR, with palace security. 3 stern men, dark suits, no smiles. "You submitted this," one of them asked, holding the note. She froze. I don't know what you mean." They stared at her. "Do you have a complaint to make?" another asked. She shook her head. "No, I was just tired. That's all." They dismissed her 5 minutes later. As she walked out, she heard one of them say, "Tell him it's handled." Her blood turned to ice. They weren't investigating. They were reporting back to him. When she finally spoke to someone, and they warned her to run, there was only one person left she trusted, an elderly laundry woman named Edith. Quiet, kind, loyal. She found her folding bed sheets and whispered, "I think he's trying to destroy me." Edith didn't even ask who he was. She just nodded and said the words that changed everything. "You need to leave before he decides you've become too loud." Too loud. Edith looked her dead in the eye. "He doesn't like problems. And you're becoming one." That night, she packed a small bag. Just the essentials. ID, a toothbrush, some cash. She didn't have a plan. She just knew she couldn't survive much longer. But before she could slip out, she found a letter under her door. Unmarked. Unfolded. It read, "You're being watched. If you leave, you won't make it far." She dropped it. Tears welled in her eyes. Because now it wasn't just punishment. It was a threat. The moment she fought back, and lost even more. Something snapped inside her. She didn't leave. Not yet. She stayed. And the next day, she wrote a formal letter. A direct accusation. She named Andrew. She handed it, shaking, to the deputy household manager. He took it, read it, then calmly folded it, and said, "We'll look into this." That was it. No apology. No outrage. No protection. Just a bland dismissal. She never saw that letter again. But she did see the consequences. Her room was moved to a basement-level quarters. Her meals were delayed. Her pay was suddenly under review. And worst of all, her staff login was revoked. She couldn't clock in. She couldn't get paid. She couldn't work. Without being fired, she'd been erased. The cliffhanger, when the punishment spread to her family. She had one lifeline left. Her younger sister. Back home, far from the palace. The one person she called once a week, just to hear a familiar voice. But on her next scheduled call, her sister didn't answer. Not once. Not twice. Not even after 10 tries. The next day, she got an anonymous message via a palace envelope slid under her door. Inside, a printed screenshot of her sister's Facebook page. Her name, her workplace, her photos, circled in red ink. The name of her sister's school. No message. No explanation. Just a warning. She dropped to her knees. Because now, the punishment wasn't just about her. Now, they were targeting who she loved. And what came next would make her realize the palace wasn't just protecting Andrew. It was protecting a network. And she was about to uncover just how far they'd go to keep their secrets buried. What if the most powerful woman in the world was just a few steps away, while you were being broken? What if behind one door, there were pearls and crowns and public smiles, and behind another, silence, fear, and trauma? Because as the former maid tells it, the most harrowing part wasn't what Andrew did. It was how close the queen was when it all happened. Not in another country. Not at Balmoral. Not on tour. But right there. Just down the hall. And somehow, she never intervened. Or worse. Maybe she knew. When the walls felt thinner than ever. The royal apartments were located just past the North Wing staff corridor. The queen's personal suite sat beneath chandeliers imported from Tsarist Russia. Gilded mirrors. Oil paintings of ancestors long dead. Everything screamed history, power, continuity. And just 2 corridors down, a plain wooden door. No gold. No guards. Just her. A maid's quarters. Where a girl cried into her pillow every night, afraid to sleep. Afraid he'd come knocking again. Afraid no one would stop him. And yet, every morning, she watched the queen pass by, escorted, composed, immaculately dressed. They'd lock eyes, briefly. No words. Just a gaze. And sometimes, she swore the queen's expression shifted. A twitch. A hesitation. A hint of recognition. But it never lasted. And it never led to action. The day the queen spoke and said nothing. It was a garden party. One of those glossy, press-filled, carefully curated royal events. She was assigned to serve iced teas near the queen's shaded table. She'd been warned. No direct eye contact. No unnecessary conversation. Be invisible. But when she bent to pour Lady Sarah's glass, she felt someone watching her. She glanced up, and there she was. The queen. Her face unreadable. Regal. Untouchable. But for a second, Her Majesty tilted her head and said quietly, "Are you well, dear?" Not loudly. Not for show. Just soft. Personal. Her hands trembled. She nodded, lips sealed. Because what could she say? "Yes, ma'am, aside from the fact that your son is destroying my life behind your back, or maybe with your full knowledge." Instead, she whispered, "I'm fine." The queen smiled faintly. "Very good. Carry on." That was it. No follow-up. No inquiry. No invitation to speak in private. Just dismissal, dressed in warmth. And then, the queen returned to her cucumber sandwich. As if nothing had happened. The paintings that judged her in silence. At night, she'd walk through the royal galleries after her shift. Empty halls. Velvet ropes. Spotlit masterpieces. She began to feel like the portraits were watching her. Queen Victoria's stoic stare. George VI's solemn gaze. Judging. Or perhaps warning. "You're not one of us," they seemed to say. "You were never meant to survive this world." And yet, she had survived. Barely. But with every step, she wondered, did the queen really not know? Or did she choose not to? The clues that hinted at awareness. One morning, She overheard a conversation between two senior aides. They didn't know she was nearby, tucked behind a velvet curtain, dusting a sconce. I told her we had another staff issue in the North Wing, one muttered. She sighed, the other said. Didn't even ask who. She knows. She just doesn't want it documented. They moved on quickly, but the words lingered. Another staff issue. No name. No outrage. Just a sigh. As if this had happened before. As if the Queen had decided, long ago, that the stability of the monarchy came before the suffering of the staff. The housekeepers slip. It was always the senior staff who let the truth leak through the cracks. One day, as she prepared fresh linens, the head housekeeper pulled her aside. You've been looking pale, dear, she said. I'm fine, she lied again. A pause. Then, don't worry. Things tend to sort themselves out. His interest doesn't last. His interest, not the prince. Not His Royal Highness. Just his interest. So casual. So routine. She wanted to scream. How many others? How many girls have you watched fade away under that same dismissive tone? But she stayed quiet. Because speaking meant leaving. And she wasn't ready. Not yet. The palace doctor, who asked no questions. Her back was seizing. Her wrists were swollen. Stress insomnia had made her hair start falling out. Finally, she was permitted to see the royal physician. He barely looked up. Overworked? He asked, glancing at her chart. She nodded. I've been under pressure. He scribbled something. Rest. Fluids. Avoid confrontation. Confrontation. He didn't clarify. Did he know? Had others hinted at what was happening? Or was this just the standard script for women with invisible wounds? She left with painkillers. No report. No follow-up. And a hollow ache in her gut. Even the doctor had been trained not to see her. The moral dilemma she couldn't escape. She wasn't stupid. She knew the Queen had spent her life wrapped in protocol, diplomacy, and duty. But wasn't it also her duty to protect the people inside her palace? Even the invisible ones? Especially the invisible ones? What kind of leadership stays silent when its house is rotting? What kind of monarchy chooses loyalty to image over loyalty to humanity? The more she asked, the worse it felt. Because if the Queen did know, it meant complicity. If she didn't know, it meant failure. Either way, the palace wasn't safe. And neither was she. The night the Queen's corgi became a messenger. It sounds strange now, but the turning point was a dog. One of the Queen's corgis, Willow, escaped into the staff corridor late one night. She found the dog pacing outside her room, tail down, whining softly. She coaxed it in, fed it scraps, wrapped it in a blanket. An hour later, a royal footman arrived, breathless. Oh, thank God. Her Majesty is in a panic, he said. She handed the corgi over. He paused, looked around her room. Then, strangely, said, Thanks for keeping her safe. We'll remember that. She nodded, confused. The next morning, something even stranger happened. A fresh bouquet of lavender appeared on her bedside table. No card, no note, just perfectly arranged flowers, like the ones placed in royal rooms. A gift from the Queen? A thank you? Or a message? She didn't know, but it was the only time in months she felt seen. And that made what happened next all the more chilling. The return of Andrew, and the unsettling timing. After weeks of distance, silence, absence, he reappeared, not at her door, but in her space. He requested her by name to clean his study. She hadn't been assigned there in months. It felt like a trap, but she couldn't refuse. So she entered, gloved, professional, silent. He didn't look up from his paper. You've been quiet, he murmured. She said nothing. I hear you've been seen. Her breath caught. Was he referencing the dog? The flowers? The Queen? He looked up, eyes hard, lips curled. Careful who notices you. The light isn't always a good place to be. She left that room shaking. Not because of what he did, but because of what he knew. And who might have told him? The chapter's final moment. The silk scarf. A few days later, she returned to her quarters after a long shift. Exhausted, bruised, drenched in sweat, and sitting on her pillow was a silk scarf. Royal blue, embroidered, the kind worn only by the Queen herself during equestrian events. She stared at it. Was it a gift? A warning? A token? It was folded perfectly, placed intentionally. No note, no explanation, just presence. She held it in her hands, soft, fragile, strangely heavy. And in that moment, one terrible thought formed in her mind. She knows. But why hadn't she stopped it? Why hadn't she helped? Was the queen quietly acknowledging her pain? Or was she reminding her that even her suffering was still within royal control? And just as she sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the scarf, a voice rang out in the corridor. A male voice. Andrew. Louder than before. Closer. I said I want her cleaning my suite tomorrow. He didn't whisper this time. He didn't need to. Because now, he knew she had nowhere left to run. And what happened in that suite would be the breaking point that pushed her into rebellion. What if every move you made was being recorded? Not by cameras, not by journalists, but by the very system designed to protect your abuser? Because that's what she began to suspect. That somewhere in the palace, in a quiet office behind locked doors, there was a file with her name on it. A file documenting her disruptions, her insubordination, her attempts to speak out. She wasn't being watched to protect her. She was being monitored to control her. And the moment she realized that, she knew she was in more danger than ever before. The feeling of being tracked. It started with small inconsistencies. Her staff access badge began to glitch. Doors she once had clearance for now flashed red. Rooms she'd never been allowed in suddenly opened. When she asked security, they told her it was a system error. But the way the guard said it? Too quick. Too dismissive. Like he'd been told not to answer questions. Then came the late-night knocks. Not from Andrew this time. From other staff. A new assistant house manager asked her about her emotional health. A royal HR rep scheduled a well-being check that turned into a quiet interrogation. Have you been feeling overwhelmed? Do you ever have trouble following orders? Would you say you feel safe working here? She answered cautiously, but the questions weren't about concern. They were about building a case. The day she heard her name on someone else's lips. She was passing through the palace laundry corridor when she overheard it. Two staffers whispering near the folding tables. The girl from North Wing? Yeah, she's flagged. Are you serious? They said she's on watch. Internal notes. Quiet file. She froze, stepped back into the shadows, and waited for them to leave. Flag. Watch. Quiet file. The words looped in her mind like a warning siren. She didn't imagine it. She wasn't paranoid. There really was a file. And she was officially being tracked. Not protected. Not defended. Not rescued. Managed. How the palace keeps secrets. It's easy to forget that Buckingham Palace is more than a home. It's a fortress. A political machine. A brand. And like any powerful institution, it keeps detailed records. Of every employee. Every complaint. Every incident. But not all files are equal. Some are formal, locked in HR databases. Others are whispered into being. Built off of side remarks, unofficial notes, quiet instructions from above. She asked an older colleague about the phrase, quiet file. The woman looked around before speaking. It means they're collecting reasons to remove you without backlash. If you suddenly disappear, no one will ask why. They'll already have it documented. Documented how? False time cards. Missed duties. Disruptive behavior. It didn't need to be true. It just needed to be plausible. And the moment she understood that, her stomach turned. She was being prepped for erasure. The file she wasn't supposed to see. A week later, during an errand to the royal admin office, she was told to drop off documents for filing. She wasn't allowed to browse, but she noticed a folder on the corner of the desk. Her name, typed neatly on the tab. She froze, then leaned closer. Inside were incident slips, printouts, and something that made her blood run cold. A page labeled Behavioral Risk Indicators. Emotionally reactive. Has questioned hierarchy. Potential instability due to personal stressors. Possible external contact risk. External contact risk? She hadn't spoken to the press, but she had written letters. Personal ones. To herself. To her sister. Were they reading them? She snapped a mental photo of the document and stepped back, heart hammering. Now she knew. She wasn't just a liability. She was a potential whistleblower. And the palace was already writing her exit. The male guard who tried to warn her. Not everyone inside was blind. One evening, a younger palace guard, early 30s, passed her in the courtyard. He slipped her a folded napkin with her tea. Inside, a single sentence. They're preparing a narrative. Stay ahead of it. She found him later. What do you mean? He hesitated. I've worked military detail. When VIPs need to silence a situation, they don't confront it. They write a version of events first. Then they force you to fit it. She asked him the obvious. Why are you helping me? He looked away. Because my sister worked here once. She left crying. No one ever asked why. When her room was searched, the next sign came without warning. She returned from shift to find her bedding shifted. Her drawer slightly ajar. A notepad gone. A necklace missing. She reported a possible theft to her supervisor. 2 hours later, the supervisor returned and said, "We didn't find anything concerning, but we advise you keep fewer personal belongings in shared quarters." She hadn't shared that room with anyone in months. They weren't just tracking her. They were invading her privacy, looking for something. A journal? Evidence? Names? She no longer felt like an employee. She felt like a target. The surveillance that wasn't technical. She realized the surveillance wasn't digital. It was human. Staff were being told to watch her, to note her mood, to report her movements. Her colleagues stopped talking around her. One cleaner avoided eye contact entirely and whispered, "You're being profiled. Tread carefully." Even the cook who once snuck her tea said, "They asked if I'd seen you meeting anyone. I told them no, but they're building something." It wasn't paranoia. It was policy. And the worst part? She didn't know how long it had been happening. Weeks? Months? Was the file started before she ever fought back? Before she even understood what was happening? The conversation that changed everything. In a rare moment of bravery, she approached one of the older royal secretaries during a hallway pass. A man who'd been around for decades. "Sir, may I ask something?" He turned, surprised by her boldness. "If someone has a quiet file, can they challenge it?" He didn't blink. "Where did you hear that phrase?" "I overheard staff. I want to know if it's real." He studied her, coldly, politely, and then said, "If such a thing existed, and I'm not saying it does, it would not be wise to discuss it further, even if it's based on lies." He paused. Truth is irrelevant in such matters. Perception is everything. Then he walked away, leaving her with one terrible, final realization. The palace didn't need proof. They only needed plausibility, and they were already planting it. The cliffhanger, the page she found in a printer. Late one evening, while helping another housemaid restock supplies near a staff printer, she noticed something left behind. A fresh printout, still warm. She grabbed it, thinking it was trash. Then she read the first line. Draft, Staff Incident Summary, Confidential. Her name was in the second paragraph. Allegations of emotional instability. Concerns about appropriate boundaries with senior personnel. A claim that she had shown signs of paranoia and expressed interest in external communication. None of it was true, but it looked official. Typed, formatted, headed with a royal crest. She froze. They were writing her out, prepping her dismissal, or worse, her discrediting. Because if she ever spoke out, this would be their weapon. A neat, rehearsed story. She was unstable. She was obsessed. She was never harmed. She imagined it all. And then, she flipped the page. At the bottom, per order of HRH, secure document until advised. HRH, Her Royal Highness? No, this wasn't a woman's order. It was his. Andrew. He wasn't just controlling her life in secret anymore. Now, he was crafting her public downfall. And what she did next would flip everything upside down. Because she didn't run. She made a copy and hid it where they'd never look. Before the tabloids, before the arrests, before the world associated his name with private islands, secret lists, and whispered horrors. Inside Buckingham Palace, Jeffrey Epstein was already a ghost in the walls. Not talked about directly, not named openly, but referenced in nods, in strategic silences, in shifts of behavior that didn't make sense until they made too much sense. Because for this Maid, what was once a vague discomfort about Prince Andrew's behavior transformed into full-blown dread the moment Epstein entered the picture, and by then, it was already too late. The first time she heard his name, it wasn't in a conversation. It wasn't in a newspaper. It was on a dry cleaning slip. She was sorting freshly pressed garments outside the North Wing laundry facility when she noticed the label. For guest, Mr. J. Epstein. Room 7A, Royal Guest Suite. No title. No sir. Just a name. And yet, everything about the slip felt off. The handwriting was neater. The request was marked urgent. The garment itself, a black cashmere jacket, reeked of new money. She asked the delivery runner, "Who's Epstein?" He looked over his shoulder, then muttered, "No one you want to know." She thought he was being dramatic. until she saw who came to collect the jacket. The first time she saw him. Tall, balding, wearing a smirk like it was armor. He didn't introduce himself, didn't thank her. Just grabbed the jacket and walked off like he owned the hallway. She didn't know his name at that moment, but she felt something cold, a familiar type of entitlement. Predatory. She remembered thinking, he walks like Andrew. Later, when she saw photos of Epstein in the papers, she gasped, because she remembered that walk, that jacket, that night, and that look in his eyes that said, "You're not a person, you're a service." The cleaning order, that made her sick. Shortly after Epstein's visit, she was instructed to assist in post-guest sanitization. That wasn't unusual. Guest suites were always deep cleaned after VIPs left. But this time was different. The sheets were stripped twice. The rugs were removed and replaced. Even the curtains were taken down. No questions, the supervisor barked. Just follow protocol. She found champagne stains, lipstick on napkins, a broken pearl earring under the couch, and strangest of all, a child's bracelet behind the nightstand. Beaded, plastic, too small for an adult wrist. She handed it to the supervisor. "Where did you find this?" the woman snapped. "In the guest suite." The supervisor yanked it from her hand. "You didn't see this." Then she left. The maid stood there, frozen. Because what was a child's bracelet doing in a royal guest room? The overheard conversation that turned her stomach. Weeks later, she passed a group of footmen smoking just outside the palace gates. They didn't see her. One joked, "You hear Epstein's back next month?" Another replied, "Tell the North Wing staff to clear out. We don't need another complaint." Laughter. Then, Andrew's got his playground back. She felt bile rise in her throat. Playground? Who were they talking about? What did they mean by another complaint? How many people knew? How many stayed quiet? And why wasn't anyone doing anything? The protection list mystery. Every month, security released an internal VIP clearance list. Names were coded. Aliases were common. Only select staff got to see the full versions. One day, while delivering tea to a planning room, she glimpsed it on a clipboard. Under red tier, "Do not disturb," was a line item. Guest, Mr. E.L. Finch. Affiliated royal, Duke of York. Notes, escort clearance required. No unaccompanied staff. She blinked. Mr. E.L. Finch? A footnote beside it in pencil. Same as J. That was it. That was the alias. Finch equals Epstein. The palace had a nickname system for him, which meant this wasn't a one-time visit. This was a pattern, a protected guest, with rules designed not to protect the staff, but to protect him. The day Andrew changed. After Epstein's first visit, Andrew became bolder, smug, sharper, more entitled than ever. He began requesting female staff by name, hosting private brunches in off-limits rooms, joking in ways that made her skin crawl. "You're lucky to work here," he told her once while she polished a desk. Most girls would die for a room this close. She ignored him. He smirked. "You'll learn to appreciate access." It wasn't flirtation. It was a warning. Epstein didn't just bring corruption. He normalized it. And Andrew soaked it in, like he'd been waiting for permission to go darker. The guest book entry that proved everything. Each royal guest signed a book. It wasn't public. It wasn't official. Just a ledger tucked into a wooden cabinet in the guest suite foyer. She once saw it open, left carelessly by a junior attendant. She flipped pages. Dates. Initials. Handwriting. And then, there it was. J. Epstein, January 3rd. Neat. Slanted script. A tiny drawn crown beside the name. Someone had added that crown. A joke? A nickname? She turned the page and saw the next entry. G. Maxwell, January 3rd. Her hands began to shake. Maxwell. Ghislaine. They'd both been there. Same night. Same suite. Everything made sense now. The bracelet. The cleaning. The secrecy. The other girl. Not a maid. Not a staffer. Not from the palace at all. She was young. Too young. Blonde. American accent. Nervous. The first time the maid saw her, she was walking behind Andrew and Epstein near the West Parlor. No badge. No uniform. Just a tight dress and eyes that screamed panic. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't eat. She didn't stay the night in staff quarters. And the next morning, she was gone. No record. No name on the guest list. No trace in the logs. Erased. But she remembered her face. And years later, when a photo emerged of a young girl posing awkwardly with Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell. She recognized the eyes. It was her, the invisible guest. The world called her a victim. The palace pretended they'd never seen her. But she had, and that made her feel complicit. The moment she nearly quit. It wasn't Andrew that almost drove her out. It was Epstein. His presence amplified everything. The lies, the danger, the network. He made her realize this wasn't about a prince abusing his status. It was about a system shielding monsters. She packed her things, prepared her resignation, even wrote a letter, and signed, blunt, desperate. I've seen too much. I can't stay quiet. If you care about justice, start in room 7A. She didn't send it. She was scared, but she kept the letter and hid it because part of her knew the world would ask for proof one day. The cliffhanger, the night she was called to serve his room. It was late. Most staff had clocked out, but she received an order, hand-delivered by a supervisor. Extra hands needed for post-event cleanup in the Duke's East study. She didn't want to go. Something about the timing felt off. But refusing wasn't an option. She stepped into the hallway, turned the corner, reached the door. Inside, champagne glasses, cigarette smoke, laughter. Andrew was seated. Epstein was next to him. And between them was another girl. Young, silent, terrified. The moment she entered,